Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to my Thursday night real estate investors hangout. I do this hangout every Thursday night, and I invite real estate investors, whether you're new or getting started or you've got some experience, but you want more tips, to come and join our hangout. I do instructional training, and I also do Q&A, and as well as interviews. So I have an interview lined up in 2 weeks with a rehabber from San Diego. He's going to be giving you a lot of his tips of how he stays organized in his business, and he makes things really efficient. Next week, I will be in Sacramento and be looking at some of the rehabs we're doing up there. So I'll probably post a video for you to watch, but it might not be live. So it could be videos of the houses if I can pull all that together before Thursday at 6. So thank you all for joining me. And I've been doing a series on Thursday nights called Find, Fund, Fix, and Flip. And we've completed this series. I started it in October. And interspersed in there, I had some interviews with people and had them share what they were doing, some very successful real estate investors. And so I finished that series, and we're going to start working on property management and rentals in the next series. And before I do that, I realized I've given you just enough information to make you dangerous. So I don't want to do that. I want to kind of step back, pull back the curtain here, and show you some of the things that can happen and that do happen when you have a real estate investing business. So I thought, because it was April Fool's, that was a really good time to do this topic, because I don't want anyone to be a fool. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that would be helpful for you to learn, so that you don't make some mistakes that many of us do. I mean, it's hard to avoid all the different mistakes. It's a complicated business. And so things do happen, and there's things you just wouldn't expect that a tenant or a contractor will pull over on you. But once you have the basics down, you could avoid any, of the kind of common things that happen as people do real estate. So some of these things happen when you're flipping and fixing. A few of them can happen when you're wholesaling. And some of them also happen only, if you're renting it out to tenants. So I've kind of mixed all those things together, because contractors, you deal with them when you have a rental as well as when you're flipping, and you're always dealing with contracts, in other words, the documents. So I wanted to cover a lot of those things. So what I did tonight was put together 10 ways that you can be fooled in real estate. So I made a list, and it's behind me. I'm going to go through some details on that, and hopefully show you some picture that's related to each one. And those pictures kind of jog my mind about the story that goes with it, and it gives you something to look at besides my mug. So with that, let's get started. Oh, if any of you would like, I do have a an ebook to share with you. So I'll tell you how to get that. You can go to wisewealthuniversity.com/PV lending. PV lending. So it's wisewealthuniversity.com/PV lending. And I'll put the my hangout up there. If you want to subscribe to the hangouts, you go to wisewealthuniversity.com/hangouts, and you'll get an email reminder each week about the hangouts. So you go to the same website and go /PV lending, and you can get a free ebook about private lending. And you can also, let me see if I can get it up here. You can also follow me on Twitter. We do frequent announcements and tips on Twitter. On Twitter, I'm the Pink Professor. So that's how you can find me. I'm going to screen share that website for you if I have the PV lending one. So hold on, so that you could possibly get, I'd like to give you a chance to get the website. All right, that's just a hangout, so you can see that. Let me find the website for you. I might not have it up during Webinar Jam. And if I don't, I probably closed it. All right, so let's go with a picture instead. Go back to this. And I'll start out with one of our pictures. All right, I got to reload the picture here. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about understanding value. And by value, I mean the value of the property that you're purchasing. So in order to do that, let me switch back to the lower third here. In order to do that, you need to understand your comps. You need to understand what the property's worth. But more than that, you need to do an analysis of that as a rental property and consider all the costs involved with acquiring it, not just what the property's worth, but what it's going to cost you to buy it and hold it. And so I don't want people to forget about capital expenditures, because things do happen that you have to repair: roofs, driveways, pipes bursting. I know we had a pipe burst at a house, and that wasn't covered by insurance because it's not in the property. So it's very important that you understand the capital expenditures that can come with that. And of course, roofs and driveways aren't necessarily covered by insurance because, you know, they're just degrading over time. So I'll give you kind of an example of that and what can happen. Screen share my pictures here. So for example, in this particular property, you can see we had a fire. So we got paid by the insurance just to fix these 2 porches. Well, while we have someone there, of course, we want to, you know, fix all the porches and repaint them, and that's going to cost extra money. So you want to have your capital expenditures. At the same time, there was a pipe that was broken, a main drain pipe in the same building a few months back. And so that was quite expensive proposition to get replaced. So those things can definitely happen. All right, so let me move to a different property here. Unfortunately, every time I switch pictures, I've got to come back and do a screen share. All right, so if the property's new, you have to know what the property is. Here's another tip. If you're going to do landscaping on a house that's completely flat, if you do buy a new property, it's very easy and, you know, inexpensive. Once the property has hills and you need to terrace it and things like that, it costs a lot more to do the landscaping. So let me show you what that costs. So if I had the same house and it was flat, it would have cost about $5,000 to do the landscaping. And the fact that it had hills and I had to do some terracing cost quite a bit more. So, and usually in general, you can think that people spend about 1% of the value of the property to do the landscaping, 1 to 5% of what you're spending. So some people go up to 10%, and that's pretty much what it cost on this one. Because of the terracing and the hill. So it cost a lot more than I wanted it to. All right, so understand value, understand your deal that you're analyzing, and don't forget about capital expenses. Okay, number 2, number 2, the second way to get fooled is to not understand the contract. You have to be able to read your contract and have it reviewed, and we suggest that you have it reviewed by an attorney. So I'll grab a picture for that and talk about 1 or 2 properties that, you know, I wish I had contracts for. All right, so this is a 9-unit apartment building that I used to own, and I bought it along with some other apartment buildings in the area. So I bought 44 units all at the same time. And I wish I had spent more time. It was quite a long procedure to buy this property, but I wish I'd had an attorney review some of the contracts because things came up later in the contract that caused me some concern. So if you're doing a normal real estate contract and it's coming from the Department of Real Estate in your area, that's not too bad because that's usually governed by the state. Once you go into a commercial or you're doing a deal straight with an owner, you often have a different kind of contract. It's handwritten, it can be a Word document, and there's a lot of clauses that an experienced seller could put in the contract that might cause you some difficulty. So, and I wish, like I said, I wish I could switch pictures, but it only lets me do one at a time. All right. So read and review your contracts. Number 3 way to get fooled is to have contracts with your workers. And I'll pull up a picture of another property and let you know what I mean by that. Here's a good example. All right, this is another one of the apartment buildings that I bought. That other one I just showed you was directly across the street. And because this was the first time I was buying a larger commercial property, the bank wanted to know who my property manager was going to be. So I ended up hiring the previous owner of this property as the property manager because he'd owned it quite a few years. And the bank was comfortable with that. Well, one of the things I didn't realize is I did not have a contract with the accountant in his office or the handyman that was directly with me. He was the property manager, so he had people who worked for him. I paid him a management fee, and then I was paying the handyman separately to do his work. Well, we ended up keeping this manager for 2 years, and after that time, when we talked to the now the handyman was getting a check directly from me. It was my check and things like that. But he was under the understanding, we found out after 2 years, that he was still working for the property manager who'd been his boss for 10 or 15 years. So what we figured out was happening was that he wasn't always on our property. He was going, if the property manager told him to go do work on another property, he went and did it, except I was the one paying his salary. So we found out, the hard way, you need to have a contract with each of those people. The handyman came into the office every day, talked to the on-site manager that I had. So we knew he was doing work for us, but we feel he was also doing work for the other person. Same with the accountant. The accountant was doing work for us, and we ended up getting charged a little bit extra because of that. So let me try going to another picture at this point. I think we're just going to have to stay with the screen share. All right, so that is number 3. Have contracts with your worker, not the property manager. The second thing about contracts is if you're doing a rehab, what I want you to do is sometimes I have a property manager do the contracts with the workers, especially if it's an out-of-state property that we're fixing. And so beware of the fax machine, beware of scanning, because here's a trick that she managed to pull off quite a few times is she would make up the contract in all the list of things that had to be done. And she would send one to me, and I'd say, well, that looks good. And then she'd send one to the contractor. Well, the one for the contractor had a lower price on it. So while I was paying her to get the work done and pay the contractor, and she was also getting a 10% cut for overseeing everything, but she had a different price on the bid a higher price on the bid that I saw than the one the contractor did. So she would actually skim the money and take the difference between what I paid her, and she would never give that full amount to the contractor. She had a different contract for him. So be aware of your contracts, have a contract directly with your worker, and also make sure that you speak with them frequently. All right, so here's another example. Now, number 4 in the way to be fooled is beware of multi-level deals. Now, it's not exactly like multi-level marketing, but it's almost like that. So multi-level deals. What do I mean by multi-level deals? That's a deal where you're buying a new construction house, or it could be another house. You're buying it from someone, and they're taking care of the rehab. They have the agent. They have the loan officer there. And they often have the property manager. So it's kind of it's a package deal. And a lot of people like to do that because it makes it simple for them. However, the key is that person who's selling you the house is usually taking a cut of everything along the way. So besides the profit that they're getting from selling it to you, they have a piece of the pie all the way along. So I'll give you an example of a deal like that. There's a couple that I can speak to, but this one, comes to mind here. This particular house was new construction, and the people selling it to me were selling it. They were also doing the mortgage. Now, they said another person was doing it, but they were in the same building, in the same office. I found out later they were all connected. And they had a property manager who was going to find my first tenant. Well, that property manager had no incentive to find my first tenant because he was being paid by the guy who sold me the house. He didn't have to work that hard to be the property manager. So I finally had to take this over for myself and put my own tenant in there. And this also goes back to the story about beware of values. And I know this has happened in many different scenarios through the western part of the country where there's a lot of new construction. And that is that they will, they'll sell you a nice new house, but they'll tell you that you can lease option this house for a pretty good price. And so beware of any lease options that are more than $50 or $100 more than the going rent, because most people don't want to pay much more money for a lease option house than they do to just rent a house. If they don't have that much money to buy the house, they're probably just going to rent anyway. So that is my example of multi-level deals. The builder, the agent, the loan officer, and the property manager are usually all in it together, and the prices are quite inflated. All right, so here's another example. What you want to do is get your own copy of the lease and the app, because I've often asked property managers, oh, send me the lease. And I realized later I don't have the contact information or the social security number of the tenant, because those aren't on the lease. They're often on the application. And when you do your own property management, you think, well, I've got all these things together. But when your property manager has those things, you need both of them from your property manager. So let me go to a house. I'll give you a colorful example of what happened with this particular house. And this is a funny one. All right, take a look at this one. This house, this is the way I found this house. When I bought it, it was, great. It was nice and clean. Everything was being taken care of. What happened was the tenant moved out early before the end of the lease. And I kept asking the property manager, what about the house? What are we going to do? Did you find anybody new? On and on. And he kept saying, well, that, the guy he moved out and didn't pay you. And I've been there, and there's really, I haven't found anybody new yet. So after a couple of months of this going on, I flew out to this property, and this is what I found. So it was completely overgrown. Thank goodness the HOA wasn't up and running too well in this area yet. But what I found was amazing. The house was completely clean, and there was a check on the table from the tenant for the remainder of the rent. Now, that means that my property manager had never been there. It wasn't on the table. It was on the kitchen counter because there was no furniture left. It was completely spotless and clean. But my manager had never been there because the check was there. The problem was the check was more than 90 days old, and I couldn't cash it. So even though I called the tenant, he wasn't about to send me a new check and lose money because he now realized he didn't really have to pay that month's rent. So be aware of, your property manager telling you that he's been to the house and you don't have any way to contact the tenant. I was able to get the information off of his check, actually, that was sitting on there. So that is number 4. Hold on to your own copy of the lease. Actually, that was, let's see what that was. Yes, number 5. Okay, number 6, beware of 4 p.m. jobs. And I'll throw up a picture here and explain exactly what that means to you. I think this is a good one to show you. All right, so this is a basement in the 6-plex that I own. And we were about to start painting this basement. We'd already rented the sprayer and everything. And we found out that there was a leak and it was coming down from the 2nd story, not even the 1st story, into this basement, which meant we couldn't start painting the floor because it was damp concrete. And so what we found was that there was a rubber gasket, which is in the overflow of every single tub you've ever been in. And that gasket had not been put in place. And the gaskets cost about $2. It's just a rubber gasket. And this has happened, not that exact item has not happened to me before. And I didn't hire these guys. That this work was done way before I bought the property. But the moral of the story is that often when contractors are doing a job at 4 o'clock, they leave, and the next day they'll tell you they're finished. But there's often some unfinished part of that job that they just don't want to go back to. They don't want to go to Home Depot and get a part. They've left a piece unfinished, and I've seen this many times in other jobs. And you really have to call them on that and check the work. So any job that they're kind of completing at the end of the day and they're in a rush can really affect your business going forward. So beware of any jobs completed 4 or 5 p.m. Check the next morning and see what was left undone. See, I don't know what. I have to think of a great picture to throw up. The next one is tenant stories. How many stories can you think of that your tenants have told you? I mean, I've heard countless ones. This is a pretty good, this is a pretty good picture here. All right, so in this townhouse that I owned, I had many, many stories from the tenants, but it just reminds me of tenants telling me that, they're going to pay the rent. They don't have pets. What's another story I've heard? Oh, that house where I did all the expensive landscaping. That person was finding a new job and was out of town and wasn't able to, pay me. He wasn't able to drop it in my bank account because he was in another location, things like that. And what turns out is he had moved out of the house and was using my garage as storage, and everything was in the garage. So when I flew out to that property and found that out, there really wasn't anything I could do at that point, because if I changed the locks, he would, and I wasn't there, he would probably just break the lock on the garage door to get in order to get his stuff out. So, and in this particular house, this person got strung along for a very, very long time, and the property manager was finally able to get him out. This one was in New Jersey, and it's not that friendly to landlords. It's very difficult to evict someone. You have to have all the proper paperwork, notifications, and if it wasn't on the right form, they won't, go through with the eviction. You have to start over. So that is number 7. Beware of tenant stories. Beware of them hiding and not answering the door when you go there. There's a lot of different stories that you can have with tenants. Oh, okay. So then the next thing I want to talk about has to do with tenants who might do a little bit of work for you. So let me see over here. That is tenants working in exchange for rent. We do have tenants work for us, but they do not work in exchange for rent. That's really a no-no. Give this one as an example. So in this sixplex, we have a little bit of landscaping outside. We have some laundry room repair. I showed you the basement. You know, they have to sweep the floor or whatever, cut a little bit of grass or shovel snow on the steps. And what we do is we find a tenant in the property who would like to do this for pay, and they actually submit an hourly to us, and then we pay them by the hour. So it's additional income from them, but it does not come off our rent. We found that when people get a deduction off their rent, that the work they do is really never that good. So it's much better to get paid for work. Some people will get a discount on rent in exchange for painting or things like that. We've had, you know, a couple break up, and the person who was in there applied the work of her ex who moved out towards her rent, but really the ex who moved out wanted to get paid. So we were kind of in the middle of their dispute, something you don't want to be. So that's something to be aware of. Make sure that you have an agreement with your tenant to do the work. Another one I can talk about is not taking a deposit. That's also not a good idea. You definitely need to have a deposit on your properties. So let me talk about this one here. So what you need to do is you need to have a real deposit. If they don't have deposit money when they move in, you apply the money that they have towards the rent. You can keep collecting a portion of the deposit going forward, because I think I got that backwards. Apply the money to the deposit. If they don't keep paying you the rent, you can always evict them. You cannot evict them for not paying the deposit. So if you have them pay the first month's rent and then continue to pay the deposit as you move forward and they don't pay it, you have no recourse whatsoever. So always apply all the money they give you towards the deposit. You can start evicting the next month if they do not come up with the first month's rent. So never rent to someone without taking a deposit. Okay, and I think I mentioned that it also applies to this house, but I'll come up with another picture for you just to make it entertaining. Here's another one. It just reminded me again of, I had the same property manager for a couple of those houses that I just showed you, these older houses in the Midwest. And that particular manager is the one who was always paying the contractor less than I paid her to get the work done. So that was always, you know, we found out later when we talked to the contractors that they hadn't been paid the full amount that I thought I was paying for the job. So the moral to that story is not cutting or letting go of your manager sooner. Okay. You hear a lot of stories. You want to believe the best and you want to give them a break, but it's your business in the end. So if you're having problems with a property manager and things just aren't going the way you would expect them to, it's best to cut your ties and move on and get a different manager. So I hope that summarizes today tonight, some of the things that can cause you to lose money as a real estate investor. That's not why you got in the business. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't lose money. So that's why I went over 10 ways you can be fooled as a real estate investor. So first of all, you need to understand value. Number one, you need to read and possibly review the contracts with an attorney. That's not as important when you're using the state contracts that an agent would give you. Have contracts with your workers directly and not through the property manager or through the person who's overseeing your rehab. Beware of multi-level deals and make sure that all those prices aren't inflated and you end up with an overpriced house. Get a copy of the lease and the application from all of your tenants. Be aware when contractors are finishing up at the end of the day they may have another job the next morning at a totally different location, and they just aren't going to finish your job. Another caveat to that is, sign a release of lien for every amount that they pay you. Beware of tenant stories. They definitely have a lot of stories that they're going to tell you because they want to stay in that house and not pay rent. Beware of tenants working for you. Have them work for money, real money, and not in exchange for labor. The other way to get fooled is to not take a deposit. Definitely apply the money to the deposit and then continue to collect the rent. If they don't have it, they're evicted. Okay? And then if you're working with either a contractor or a property manager and things aren't working well, just cut your losses, let go. You can always find another person to work with that's going to have your best interest in mind. And that's the goal, right, of having this real estate, is to have your interest in mind and make money with your investments. So I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight in the 10 ways you can be fooled as a real estate investor. So let me put up the place you can join us for Hangouts. Join me at wisewealthuniversity.com/Hangouts. And Wise Wealth University is on Facebook. It's also on Google+. So you can look there for various announcements about our Hangouts. And you can also follow me on Twitter at The Pink Professor. I'd be happy to see some tweets from you and also share out the Hangouts that we do. So thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Next week, I will be in Sacramento, so I won't have a nice office with nice lights to broadcast from. So I might be uploading either a replay or a new video of some of the rehabs that we're doing up there. In a couple weeks, I'm going to start some more detail into letters. It's just going to show you kind of a copy of one of ours or so. I've got like a whole stack of letters ready to mail out right now. So to find new deals. So I'm going to go in detail of how you can set up your own letter campaign. And I'm going to have a small mini course on that on my website to make it easier for you guys to follow some of the mailing and the direct mail so that you can get your own deals going. So I look forward to that. And I will see you in 2 weeks. We have a great interview lined up with a surprise guest from San Diego, and he's going to tell you about his remodel business and his rehab business. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.